Hi. In this lesson, we're going to be working on parallel and perpendicular lines. Before we begin, we first have to learn a few vocab words that are going to help us become more successful in this lesson. The first one is parallel lines. Now, I know that we've all learned what parallel and perpendicular lines was in the past. Parallel and perpendicular lines technically represent type of lines that either will never intersect or cross each other so perfectly that they make something called a right angle, which is 90 degrees. Now, that's great when it comes to geometry, but we have to remember this is algebra. So when it comes to algebra, parallel lines never cross. However, what you want to remember is they have the same exact slope. So two lines that are parallel have the same exact slope. And two lines that are perpendicular are going to be opposite and reciprocal. What does this mean? Let's say, for example, I had an equation of y equals 3x plus 4. And I wanted to ask you, hey, what is a parallel slope to this one? Well, a parallel slope would be something that has the same exact slope. What would that represent? That would represent a situation like this. Y equals 3x plus whatever b it wants it to be. And that's what parallel represents, that they're both the same exact slope, the 3 that's in front of the x. Well, what if it was perpendicular? What would it be perpendicular if it was perpendicular to y equals 3x plus 4? Well, we got to remember, what does opposite and reciprocal mean? In case you forget, opposite means opposite sign. So if it's negative, it becomes positive, positive, negative. Reciprocal means that you're going to flip the fraction. So for example, first you're going to notice y equals 3x. Well, first let's make this a slope, which is 3 over 1. If I'm going to have the opposite is going to be y equals negative because it's positive already. And I'm going to flip the fraction. Just flip it. 3 over 1 is going to flip to 1 over 3. X, and then the b is going to be whatever b is going to be given to us in the situation in the future. But what I want you to remember is parallel means same exact slope, and perpendicular means opposite and flip. Okay? All right, so let's try our first problem. In the first problem, it says directions. Write the equation in slope-intercept form of a line that is parallel to y equals 2x plus 1 and passing through 2 comma 3. There's a few keywords that we want to first understand. Were you able to find them? The first one is slope-intercept form, which don't forget, slope-intercept form is going to be y equals mx plus b. And the second keyword was what? Was parallel. Parallel means what again? Same exact slope. So we need to remember that what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with the same exact slope as whatever is given to us. Well, they gave us an equation of y equals 2x plus 1. So that means that the slope is going to be 2. And if it's going to be the same slope, well, that means my new m that I'm going to be using is going to be 2 because it represents the same exact slope. Now the question is, what do we do next? They want an equation in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. However, do you remember what the b represents? The b represents the y-intercept. So if it represents the y-intercept, did they give us the y-intercept? No, they gave us an x and a y, and that's a random point. So we have to go back to our previous lesson and ask ourselves, which equation do we use when given a random point? What are you thinking? Hopefully you're thinking point slope form. Because in point slope form, this is going to be the equation that's going to allow us to use a slope and a random point so that we can go ahead and turn this into slope-intercept form. So don't forget, the point that they gave you is 2 comma 3. That's x1 and y1. And the new m is the same slope, which is going to be 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and plug everything in. This is what we get. Y minus y1, which is y minus 3, is equal to my slope, which is 2. X minus x1, which is what again? We clean that up a bit. Minus 2. Now, if they were asking us for point slope form, we'd be done. But they're asking us for slope intercept. So we have to remember there's 2 steps additional to this that we need to do. The first one's called distribute. That's going to be 2x, and then 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. I'm going to bring everything else down. And the last step that we need to remember is, since we're trying to isolate the y, get y by itself, we're going to do the opposite that's next to y. So there's a minus 3, so the opposite is plus 3. So I'm going to add 3 to the numbers on both sides. The 3's are going to cancel on the left, and I'm going to come over here so I have more space. And my answer is going to be y equals 2x minus 1. And that would be my answer in slope-intercept form. So realize what happened. You're passing through a random point that's given to you. The random point is going to require us to use point slope form. But it's parallel. So parallel means same slope. Because same slope means the same, we knew that the slope was 2, so we just kept it the same, which is 2. Now, some of you guys are going to wonder, well, what about this 1 that's here? To be fair, that 1 is irrelevant. It's not going to help us in our future equation. That was only going to be our y-intercept for the first equation. We need to find the y-intercept for the second equation, which happens to be -1. Okay? All right, so let's try the second one. In this example, if you feel ready, just pause the video, press play, and I'll be here. But if not, then what I want you to do is I want you to look for that key word. What is that key word that we're looking for? For me, that key word is, again, slope-intercept and parallel. So slope-intercept means I need to turn this into y equals mx plus b. However, notice the point they gave you. They gave you -1, 4. That's not a y-intercept, meaning I can't find b just from looking at it. So I need another equation. What equation am I going to use? I'm going to use point slope. Y minus y1 is equal to m x minus x1. So I have my first point, but the question is, do I have my slope? Well, they did say parallel. Parallel means what again? Parallel means the same slope. So my m is going to be the same as what I see, which is going to be -3. So what am I going to do? I now have a random point and I now have a slope. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. Y minus 4 is equal to my slope, which is -3, x minus, and don't forget that your answer, your x1 is going to be -1. So now you have a double negative. So what does a double negative do? It turns into a positive. So my next answer is going to be y minus 4 is equal to -3 parentheses x plus 1. I want you to notice something. What happened when I plugged in -1, which is the x1? It turned into +1. What happened when I plugged in y1 into my equation? It turned into -4. Every time that you're plugging numbers into parentheses, they're always going to be opposite. So it lets you know that you're doing it right. So now I'm in the situation where I have -3 in front of the x plus 1. So I am going to have to distribute. And when I distribute, I'm going to get this. Y minus 4 is equal to -3x minus 3. And then my next step now is going to be to go ahead and do what? Isolate y. So in order to isolate y, I need to add 4 to both sides. And I'm going to go to the other side. And my final answer is going to be y is equal to -3x. -3 plus 4, 1 negative, subtract, and keep the sign of the bigger number. And I get y equals -3x plus 1. So a line that's passing through -1, 4 and parallel to the slope -3x minus 2 is going to be that equation that I boxed in. Again, parallel means the same exact slope. The b that's given to you in the original problem, the y-intercept, is irrelevant in the new problem. Okay? So hopefully you got this right. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and move on to the next equation, which is example 3. But now you're going to notice a different keyword. What's the keyword that you notice? It says perpendicular. What does perpendicular mean? Perpendicular represents opposite, I'm going to abbreviate it, and flip, which is pretty much reciprocal, but we're just going to write the shortcut of it. What does that mean to flip? You're going to flip your fraction and you're going to make it the opposite sign. One problem. I don't have a fraction when I look at my slope. So let's read the example. Directions. Write the equation in slope-intercept form. You guys already know what that means. It's y equals mx plus b. And what they want is perpendicular to y equals 2x minus 2 and passing through 4, -4, which again, this is a random point. So let's call this x1, y1. Let me clean it up a bit so it looks a little better. x1, y1. So I have a random point, which means I'm going to use my formula. Y minus y1 is equal to m parentheses x minus x1. And now the goal is I have a point, I'm missing my m, but my m is perpendicular, which is opposite and reciprocal. Because my slope is not a fraction, what I want you to do is I want you to always to put it over 1 so that is a fraction. What we're first going to do is my new m is going to be opposite. So because it's positive, it's going to be negative, but I'm going to flip the fraction. So if I flip 2 over 1, I'm going to get what? I'm going to get 1 over 2, and that's my new m. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and plug everything in. I'm going to get y minus -4, so make sure we use some parentheses, is equal to my fraction, which is -1/2, and then x minus 4. Now, because I need to work this out, unfortunately, we have fractions. So I don't know how you feel about fractions, but for me, they're not my favorite. So we got to make sure we stick to the basics when it comes to fractions. The first step is when you're distributing a fraction, You're going to treat it the same way, except when you're actually multiplying something, you want to put that number as a fraction. So let's put it over 1. So when I distribute, I'm going to get negative half times x, which is going to be negative half x, stays the same. And then negative half times negative 4, I'm going to multiply top with top, bottom with bottom. But notice there's a negative times a negative, which is going to be a positive. 1 times 4, which is 4. And on the bottom, 2 times 1 is going to be 2. Now on the left side, I'm going to clean it up. I see 2 negatives, which turns into a positive, but we already knew that. So it's going to be y plus 4 equals to that. But I could clean this up because why? This could become y plus 4. Actually, let me write it on the bottom just so it's a little bit clearer. Y plus 4 is equal to negative 1 over 2x plus 2, because 4 divided by 2 is 2. And then the last step is to do what? We're going to go ahead and move the 4. So I'm going to subtract 4 to both sides. I'm going to come to the side, and I'm going to get y is equal to negative 1 over 2x minus 2, because 2 minus 4 is technically negative 2. And that's my final answer. Now, coincidence, they both have the same y-intercept. You see how they're both negative 2? That's a coincidence. It's not going to happen every single time. But what you are going to notice are these slopes are opposite and reciprocal. Opposite meaning opposite sign, and flipping it, that's the reciprocal part of it. Because we didn't have the y-intercept, remember y-intercept is when x is 0, we had to use point slope form, which is why we did all the work on the left. Okay? So now we get to example 4. In example 4, I want you to try this problem on your own. Once you're ready or you get stuck, play the video and I'll be here to answer. But what I want you to find is look for these keywords and try to understand what these keywords represent. So in example 4, it says, write the equation in slope-intercept form. We have to remember slope-intercept form is one of the most famous equations, which is y equals mx plus b. Don't forget m is a slope, b is a y-intercept. And they're asking that the line is perpendicular, next keyword, to y equals negative 1/4 x minus 2. Don't forget, perpendicular represents what again? Opposite and reciprocal, which I'm just going to write as flip. Flip the what? Flip the fraction. And it passes through 0, 5. Wait, what? It passes through what point is that? What do you think? That point happens to be the y-intercept. Wait, if it's a y-intercept, then that means they gave us what? They gave us the b. They're telling us b is equal to 5. Don't forget, y-intercept was when x is equal to 0. That's one of the most important formulas because now we know that b is equal to 5. So all I'm missing is what's my slope? Well, remember, slope is opposite and reciprocal, opposite and flip. So I notice that my fraction is negative. So now I know that my new m is going to be positive. And then I'm going to flip my fraction. So instead of being 1 over 4, it's going to be 4 over 1, which pretty much is just 4. Now I have my m, I have my b. So piecing it all together, my answer is going to be y equals 4x plus the y-intercept, which is going to be 5. And that's my answer. Now notice we didn't have to put this in point slope form. Why? Because they gave us the y-intercept. That's why you always have to be looking for that, because if once you notice x is 0, you don't have to create point slope form. It's already given to you in a very basic type of equation, which is slope-intercept form. Okay? Now, if you did do this in point slope form, what would have happened would have been this. You would have got, I'm just going to work it out really quickly, y minus y1, which is y minus 5, is equal to slope, which is 4, x minus 0. Now, when you distribute the 0, unfortunately, you don't have to do that. So it's just really y minus 5 is equal to 4x. And then obviously you want to get y by itself. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And my final answer would have been y equals 4x plus 5. And notice it's the same exact answer, right? That's the power of having these two formulas. Slope-intercept is for when you have the y-intercept. And then point slope form is when you have a random point, but you could also use it if you wanted to. So hopefully you got it right. So now we move on to the last two examples that we have, example 5 and example 6. But notice the equations that they gave us. They're asking us to write the equation of a line that is parallel and perpendicular to y equals 3. Problem is y equals 3 is what type of line? Y equals 3, y equals any number is a flat line crossing that number on that y. So let's think about it. I'm going to create a little graph really fast. Y equals 3 means I'm going to go up to 3. That's going to be my first point. And then I'm going to put a horizontal line at 3. And that's my equation. If it's parallel, what does that mean that graph has to also look like? It has to also be a flat line, meaning that y equals mx plus b, or point slope form, is not going to help us in this situation. So for me, this is more memorization. Parallel means the same, perpendicular means opposite and reciprocal. Okay, so if they're going to ask us to create a line that's parallel, what we're going to have to do is we have to understand, what does a parallel line look like in respect to this problem? It's also going to be flat. So because it's going to be flat, it's also going to be y equals a certain number. Well, where do they want us to pass? They want us to pass -4 comma -1. So because my y equals a number, it has to be specific to that coordinate. So what's the y coordinate of that one? It's -1. So my answer that's parallel would be y equals to -1. And how does that look like on a graph? I'm going to go to -1 on my graph. I'm going to put a point below the x-axis, and then I'm going to put a flat line. We're going to pretend that goes through the point, and that's a parallel line. They'll never cross. Well, that's parallel, but what about perpendicular? So for perpendicular, good luck spelling it. So for perpendicular, we have to remember perpendicular is the opposite direction, but also it makes a 90-degree angle if I was looking at it as a graph. Think about it. If I have a flat line, which is the red one, which is at y equals 3, what would be the perpendicular line to that? It'd be a line that's vertical. Well, if it's vertical, that means it crosses which axis? It crosses the x-axis. So my answer, perpendicular to the one I'm working with, is x equals. So how would I want you to memorize this? They already gave me y equals 3 as my original equation. Parallel will be the same, so that's why my answer is y equals -1. But perpendicular is the opposite. The opposite of what? The opposite of y. Opposite of y is x, and that's why my answer is x equals the x part of the coordinate that they want us to pass through, which is -4. And that's my answer for perpendicular. So remember, parallel is the same, perpendicular is opposite. That's why you use the same letter for parallel and the opposite letter for perpendicular, passing through the number that they want as that coordinate. Okay? And that's it. And if I wanted the graphic to show you, I'm going to go to -4 on the x. I'm going to put a dot, and then it's going to be an up and down line. And you'll notice it crosses so perfect that it makes a 90-degree angle. Now, they didn't ask us to graph for this question, but it's just to show you a visual of what it looks like and why parallel will be the same and perpendicular will be opposite letters. Okay, so now we're going to move on to example 8. And example 8, I want you to try this one on your own. Be careful with it, because the equation that's going to be given to you is probably different. So once you're ready, play the video, and I'll be here to answer the question. Okay, so in example 6, it says write the equation of a line that is parallel and perpendicular to x equals -1 and passing through 1, 10. So we're going to go, okay, we could graph it, but we're not. We're going to go straight to what parallel represents. Parallel means that it's going to be the same as the equation that's given to me. It's x equals -1. So because it's the same, I know that parallel means my answer is going to be x equals, but not to -1, because that'd be the same line. It has to pass through the point they gave me, which is 1, 10. So it's going to be x equals what number? X equals to 1. Why 1? Because that's the x coordinate. Don't forget, this is x and this is y. So my answer would be x equals 1. Now for perpendicular, we have to remember that perpendicular means the opposite. Well, the equation given to me was x, so opposite would be what? Would be y. Y equals to what? Look at the coordinate. What's the y value? It's 10. So my answer will be y equals 10. And those are my two answers. Those would be two lines or two equations that would be perpendicular and parallel to x equals -1. So remember, parallel is the same, perpendicular is opposite. Okay? So recapping everything, parallel and perpendicular, when it comes to algebra, you have to remember that parallel represents the same exact slope. Perpendicular represents opposite and reciprocal. If their equations are basic as x and y, you have to remember parallel is the same and perpendicular is the opposite. It sounds simple, but when you're learning everything in this chapter, you have to remember that in this unit, we have to be really good at the vocab words like slope-intercept, point-slope form, slope, average rate change, and now parallel and perpendicular. So once you know all of these, make sure you write them down on the flashcard. Make sure you put them in your notes, because these are words that we always want to remember. Okay, thank you for watching. Best of luck.